Hi, this is class for Tuesday, November, I want to say 14th. 14th. Okay, so here we are in the story in Menachot 29b, Masechet Menachot, and what we've learned so far is that in the beginning of this story, Moses is waiting on Mount Sinai, waiting for God to finish the Torah, and God saying, "Wait a second, I'm done with the words, but I need to add on the little decorations." And Moses is like, "What? Why are you taking so long? You gotta do. You got. I have people waiting for this Torah. You have to give it to me quick because they're getting very impatient down below." And God says, "No, you know what? I have to do this because one day there's going to be a rabbi who all of these decorations are going to make heaps and heaps of new laws because of the decorations on the letters themselves." And and Moses is like, "Huh? Well, I'd like to see this guy." And so God says, there's this phrase, chazor la'acharecha, turn around or turn yourself around, turn to your back. And it's like a time machine because Moses is basically catapulted into the future. And he's now sitting at the eighth row of the study hall of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva is talking. And Moses is like, what? I don't understand a thing that he is saying. And then all of a sudden, Rabbi Akiva says, then all of a sudden, Rabbi Akiva, a student asks a question, and Rabbi Akiva says, "This is from Moses at Mount Sinai." And then Moses says, "Oh, thank goodness they're talking about they talked about me." So Moses is obviously so impressed, and Moses turns to God and says, "God, if there's a guy like Rabbi Akiva, why are you giving the Torah to me?" And God says this phrase, "Shtok," quiet. Kach Allah b'machshava lefanai. This is what entered into my conscious or my mind. Okay, what does that mean? I'm not quite sure. Now, I was looking at this guy up here, Rabbi Levi New from the Montreal Torah Center, and interesting enough, he had a few ideas that I'd love to kind of ask you about as some questions today. Well, so first of all, he asked the following question, and this is your question number one. He says, wait a second, if Rabbi Akiva was actually teaching a law that Moses had received from Mount Sinai, then why doesn't Moses know that law when it's being taught? Why doesn't Moses realize before he says it's a halacha, it's a law from Mount Sinai? Why does Moses says, oh, finally they're teaching something I know? No, it takes them to say, it takes Rabbi Akiva to actually say Moses' name to for him to relax. So why is it that Moses doesn't actually know this law at all at this point? There were two interesting answers, and so that's the question number one. There were two interesting answers that were given in class. One was that actually Moses doesn't know this law because remember, he's up on Mount Sinai and he hasn't actually looked at the Torah yet and studied it, so he doesn't actually realize what he's going to know and what he's not going to know in a few days after he looks at the Torah, but he hasn't actually done that yet. And then another person, I think it was Xavier in class, said that it's so changed that even though it's slightly connected to Rabbi Akiva, it's so different that actually Moses would be actually legitimately confused of how it kind of made its evolution, even if it was an okay evolution, how it made an evolution from the law that Moses received to until the law that Rabbi Akiva is teaching. So, of those two answers, which one do you like better, and why? Okay. Okay, so let's move on for a second. So, why is it that Moses is convinced that Rabbi Akiva is a better teacher? And I think one way we can look at this is we can look at. Well, first of all, I will tell you that Aaron in class said something really cool. Aaron said, Moses isn't convinced that Rabbi Akiva is a better teacher. This is exactly what Moshe does all the time. Moshe is always trying to say, no, I'm not the right teacher. there's another person who can do this job better than I can. And that's actually precisely Rabbi Akiva's role as a leader, to find people who can do things as well or better than he can, and kind of pawning off that leadership to them. But let's look actually about the two things that happen in the study hall. And I'm going to ask you, of these two things, what is it that you think Rabbi Akiva learns, or Moshe learns about Rabbi Akiva, that allows him to say, this is the right person who should have received the Torah from you, not me? One is Rabbi Akiva is in the study hall and study teaching, and Moshe is not understanding any of it. Rabbi Akiva arrives at a discussion on the matter, and his student says, "Where'd you get this from?" Rabbi Akiva says, "It's a law from Mount Sinai." So, what is it here that you think that Moses is seeing that so kind of impresses upon him to actually say, "God, you should have made him the leader of the Jewish people. You should have made him the first original disseminator of Torah"? That's question number 4, I think it is, or maybe 4.5. Okay. So, okay. And then at the end, Moses says, "Silence, silence. This is risen in thought before me. Shtok kach ala b'machshava lefanai." So, what is, in your own words, what does actually this mean? What is God saying here? And why is he saying silence? What do you think? First of all, so what does it mean, silence? And number 6 is like, what is it that Moshe is asking that's so crazy here? That's like, what is it that Moshe is asking that requires this kind of like response of like, this is what I think, this is how I think it should be. Like, what is it that Moshe is challenging that God has to react in such a kind of a harsh way? Because God could have said, here's why. Here's why. Here's a good reason. Akiva is a good teacher for that moment. You're a good teacher for this moment. Like, God could have actually explained it. Why does God not? And instead basically say, I'm not telling you, right? That's question number 6. Just writing these down to make sure that I remember them when you're submitting them. Okay, so now we're on to the next part of the story. Ribono shel olam, master of the world. Here we are. You have shown me Rabbi Akiva's Torah. Now show me his reward. And God says, and God says, so first of all, what is the assumption that Moshe is making at this point? Moshe is making an assumption about the reward that Rabbi Akiva is going to receive. What is that assumption? Is Rabbi Akiva going to get a small reward, a medium reward, a large reward, and why? So that's question number 7. Okay, and so God basically uses the same words as before when it says kind of go on a time travel, chazor lacharav, go on a time machine, and Moses is now going back, going to another place in time, and actually he's moving forward in time even further than this moment where he was where he was sitting in his class, and he's seeing that they're weighing Rabbi Akiva's flesh in a butcher shop, as Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death by the Romans. So they are actually selling Rabbi Akiva's flesh for food. Oh, it's horrible. It's disgusting. And Moses says before him, Ribono shel olam, zo Torah v'zo schara. This is the Torah, and this is her reward. What is Moshe saying there? That's question number 8. What does that phrase mean? Zo Torah v'zo schara. And what is Moses, question number 9, is like, what is Moshe kind of subtly hinting at, right? So repeat this, right? If this is what the Torah is, then what? Repeat and finish that sentence. Or if this is what it means to learn a lot of Torah, then if this is the result of learning a lot of Torah, then what? Right? Basically, then I don't want part of this. I don't want part of this system. There's no logic. It should be that a great Torah teacher receives a great reward. There's a reward here. What's the reward at all? Okay. we're just going to go, before we see what God's response is. I want to show you. I want to speak a little bit about Rabbi Akiva and his death. It just so happens this is one of the stories of the 60 greatest stories of the Torah. So we can kind of check another one off by looking at this. All right. So, and this comes from, we're going to start with the Mishnah in Masechet Brachot. Okay, and it starts like this. One is obligated to recite a blessing for the bad stuff that befalls him, just the same as he recites a blessing for the good stuff. Shene Emar. And question number 11 is, when we see the word Shene Emar, what should we expect to come next? Right, we should expect a quote from the Torah that is in some way going to prove this idea. So we're looking at this phrase here, which means in English, it's from the Shema and the Ahavta, and you shall love God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your me'od, or veriness, with all of your muchness. Okay, so where is it? Try to tell me, if I'm looking here for the proof of that I should make a blessing over the good stuff and the bad stuff, which word do you think it's going to come from here? That's question number. I think that's question number 12. Number 12. Okay. And we're actually the answer is actually going to be from this word bechol levavacha, because if I were to look up the word heart in the dictionary, I would see that the word heart would be lave, lamed bet. But if we see here, there are actually two bets here. So it's almost like this is not a plural with all your hearts, but it's suggesting that heart has more components than just one bet, two bets. So they're saying here, because it could have been written as just a normal lev, but it's levavecha, it says these are pointing to two sides of your heart, a good side of your heart and a bad side of your heart. And by the way, in Hebrew, the terms for the good is the good inclination, or the Yetzer HaTov, and there's also the Yetzer HaRa. Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer HaRa. The good part of your heart and the bad part of your heart. So it's saying basically, you should love God with your good inclination, and also with your bad inclination, meaning you are doing bad stuff and you are doing good stuff, and in each of those things you're obligated to recite a blessing. So here we see this idea levavacha is the proof text for reciting a blessing over the good and a blessing over the bad. But since we're here, the Mishnah actually goes on and says b'chol levavacha, and then it talks about b'chol nafshecha, with all of your soul, meaning even if God takes your soul, uv'chol me'odecha, with all of your money, or with all of the ups and downs of your life that are handed to you. By the way, this is an interesting one. B'chol me'odecha means with all of your me'odness, with all of your veriness. Which one do you think they give two possible explanations for what this means? Love God with all of your money, or is it love God in all the moments of your life, your big moment, big high moments, and low moments? Which one do you think is correct? That's question number 13. But this is going to bring us basically, this is the Mishnah that will now bring us to this story about Rabbi Akiva. So here it is. It's in Brachot, page 61, Amud Bet. So when they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, now we talked in class about who was Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva probably lived about 70 years after the Second Temple was destroyed. He's living in this time period where Bar Kokhba is actually getting ready for his rebellion, and which Bar Kokhba loses. But one of the things that brings about this rebellion is the Hadrianic persecutions. And the Hadrianic persecutions were basically saying no male Jews are allowed to be circumcised anymore. It says that no Jews are allowed to study Torah, no Jews are allowed to teach Torah anymore. And of course, Rabbi Akiva is a Torah teacher during this time. It's a very famous story, which I believe you might have heard last year. For some reason, only Xavier knew it in class. But we did. When you learned about the life of Rabbi Akiva last year, you should have learned that Rabbi Akiva and Rav Papos, I think it was, are talking, or someone, Papos Rufus or something, are talking, and Papos Rufus says, Akiva, why are you still teaching Torah during these horrible times? Don't you realize that it's going to put you to death? And they happen to be standing by a stream. And Rabbi Akiva says the following: let me tell you a story. Let me tell you, look at this stream right here. Do you see these fish right here? Well, it turns out these fish are not the safest fish in the world, because look right over there. There are fishermen. So imagine one day a fox said, hey, fish, I noticed that there are fishermen trying to scoop you up, trying to kill you. Come out of the water with me and live with me, and everything will be okay. And the fish turn to the fox and say, silly fox, don't you realize that the water is our very element of survival? If we're having trouble surviving in the place where we are supposed to survive, how much harder will it be to survive in a place where it's not our normal way to survive, right? And the analogy here is the Torah, right? If right, Rabbi, this Rav Papos is trying to say, stop studying Torah and you can survive, and Rabbi Akiva is saying, no, I can't. If it's dangerous for me to survive in that, you doing that thing that gives me life, how much more so can I survive? Is it going to be harder to survive if I actually give that up? Right? And so that's the famous story, and that brings actually Rabbi Akiva eventually to prison, and eventually he is now put to death by the Romans. When they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, it was time for the recitation of the Shema. As they were raking his flesh with iron combs, meaning as they were peeling off his skin, right, like the most brutal death of all, he was reciting the Shema and accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven. His student said, our teacher, even now as you suffer, you are reciting the Shema? Like, why are you doing this? And he said, Rabbi Akiva said to them, all of my days I've been troubled by the verse, Bechol nafshecha, with all of your soul, meaning, even if God takes your soul, I have to love God. And I said to myself, when will I have the opportunity to ever have to be able to fulfill this verse in the V'ahavta prayer? Now that it's been given to me, shouldn't I try to fulfill it? So Rabbi Akiva prolongs his utterance of the word one until his soul left his body as he utters the final word one. Now here's the amazing thing. What happens next in the story? The angels cry out to God, and here's what they say. Check this out. Zo Torah v'zo schara. The angels are crying. Now, if you remember from our story, who was it that actually said those words? Zo Torah v'zo schara. That's question number 14. And who is saying those words in this other story? That's question number 15. And why is there a change? Why is there in one story Moshe is saying it, in this story Rabbi Akiva is saying it? I mean, in this story the angels are saying it. Why the change? That's question number 16. And look here in this story what the answer is that is actually given as our answer. God actually gives an answer, and God says, and it says in the Talmud, a bat call of the voice of God said, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, as you are destined for life in the world to come, right? So God gives an answer. Summarize, kind of give me an idea in your own words. What is that answer? That's question number, number, I don't know if it's, let's call it 17 and a half. And this is a great answer, all right? And right, so don't worry, angels. Rabbi Akiva is going to have a great life in the world to come. But this is a great answer for God to give in our story. If we go back to our story for a second, right? It's a pretty good answer, right? Right? When Moses says Ribono Shalom, God, Zo Torah v'zo schara, we would want actually God to say back, don't worry, Rabbi Akiva is taken care of in the next world. But he doesn't say that. He actually says, Shtok, kach Allah b'machshava lefanai, quiet. This is what has risen in my thoughts. And now all of a sudden, interestingly enough, This is the second, not the first time, but the second time we've heard this idea. Shtok kach ala b'machshava lefanai. So much so that it makes us want to actually equate the two, right? So help me understand this for a second. My decision to appoint you, Moshe, and not Rabbi Akiva, in some way equals my decision to make Rabbi Akiva suffer the worst death instead of receiving an amazing reward. So what is it then? What is it then these words are trying to say? Shtok kach ala b'machshava lefanai. What does that mean? Quiet, this has risen in my consciousness before me. Help me understand what's happening here, and that's how we're going to start. That's question number 18, and that's also how we're going to start class tomorrow. All right, thank you. Send all those questions to me via email.